Good morning. My name is Andrew Redmond, and I'm delighted on behalf of the Mexico Institute to welcome you to this morning's conversation with the President Councilor of Mexico's National Electoral Institute, Dr. Lorenzo Cordova. We're also honored to have with us today Congressman Lowenthal and colleagues from the International Republican Institute and National Democratic Institute, all of whom I'll introduce momentarily. We're very pleased to have as our first public event of 2022, a conversation about the challenges facing INE, which are daunting. More than a discussion of a specific institution, however, this is a conversation about the importance of independent democratic institutions and about voters' trust in the outcome of elections, the bedrock of democratic systems. This is a topic of interest not only in Mexico, but across the globe. Citizens are questioning whether current democratic systems are responding to their needs with increasing frequency, while political parties become vehicles, in many cases, for individual leaders' ambitions. In addition to being an issue of interest to Mexico and Mexicans, and to citizens globally, the operation of Mexico's institutions should matter to the United States. Our societies and economies are inextricably linked through centuries of shared history and family and commercial relationships. What happens in Mexico matters in the US in ways not found with any other bilateral relationship. How Mexico's institutions function and how they are perceived domestically and abroad influences decisions by investors, business leaders, governments, and private citizens in both countries. In 2021, INE successfully managed the largest election in Mexico's history, allowing voters to elect the members of the lower house of Congress, 15 state governorships, and numerous state and municipal level positions. Despite an ongoing pandemic, INE ensured that Mexicans were able to go safely to the polls and then tabulated and presented the results promptly. International observers provided glowing reports on the electoral process, and most important, the results were accepted by virtually all Mexican candidates and voters. INE remains in the spotlight as it seeks to carry out its duties this year, which includes 6 gubernatorial elections and, for the first time in Mexican history, a referendum on whether the president should remain in office to complete his 6-year term. To learn how INE plans to fulfill these old and new responsibilities in a period of budgetary constraint, referred to by President López Obrador as Republican austerity, it's my great honor to introduce Presidente Consejero Lorenzo Cordova. Dr. Cordova became an electoral counselor of the Federal Electoral Institute in December 2011 and was appointed President Councilor by the Chamber of Deputies in April of 2014. A lawyer by profession from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, known as UNAM, Cordova got his PhD in political theory from the University of Torino. He's a full-time researcher in the Institute for Legal Research at the UNAM, where he has coordinated the area of electoral law. He's also part of the National Researcher System in Mexico and has written and published extensively on electoral and constitutional topics, as well as political theory. Dr. Cordova, bienvenido al Wilson Center.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's really a pleasure to be once again at the Wilson Center, virtually this time. For me, it's a huge pleasure to have this roundtable with you in order to, get deep on the complexity of Mexican political situation and specifically in the status of our electoral system. I won't stop and recreate, the Mexican transition, which has INE as the best institutional result, or either I will not stop and reconstruct, the challenges that we faced to get last year the largest, the most complex, but the most well done election ever in our country. I think those are achievements that correspond to an electoral management body with the solidity and the history that INE has already achieved. I think right now the Mexican discussion, and I think the most interesting issues to this discussion regards, the current situation after, a long history of success achieved by INE. that, by the way, allocate us as the civil institution most well recognized and with the largest credibility among Mexican society. Despite that, the times for INE and for those who work at INE are not the best times. That's a kind of paradox, because if you look forward, you can mostly underline a well done job. Despite that, though, these are difficult times for INE. There is in the horizon, there is the possibility of an electoral reform, a foundational electoral reform, and not just a reform that corrects some issues and improve our electoral system. But it's in the public narrative, there is a logic of refounding the electoral system. To do that, to allocate and to settle some issues that the current situation in the Mexican electoral system discussion, I would like to share some slides with you, if you allowed me. Please let me know if I'm successful in sharing my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation. I think it's okay.
Yes, it looks great.
Thank you. So I would like to start to saying that current times are not easy times for democracies all around the world, and specifically for Mexican democracy. There are a lot of issues that we have been discussing in the last at least 6-7 years about the challenges that democracies are facing all around the world. The times in which we discussed the Latin American democracy's challenges, which were different from those of the oldest democracies, are gone. Right now, all democracies, all democratic systems, despite their age and their consolidation, are facing new and common challenges, such as the social discontent with democracy, which is the result of the lack of results in addressing the greatest problems of our times. Quoting Norberto Bobbio, the problem that democracies face because of the unaccomplished promises that the democratic transition came with, such as the increasing of poverty, which is a global phenomena, by the way, potentiated by the pandemic of COVID-19 and the economic crisis that comes forward, the sanitary crisis. The inequality, paradoxically, is never in the human history so much richness has been produced, but never in the human history so much inequality are suffering our societies. The problems of corruption, of impunity, and in some cases, Mexico is not the exception, the violence that compromise, the democratic recreation of our societies. Also, we were facing, the institutional backsliding of credibility or credibility crisis of those institutions which are the core of our democracies, such as parties and parliament, who are not having good health all around the world. On the other hand, the disruptive capabilities of the fake news phenomena and disinformation. This is a new challenges. We have been discussing about these issues a long time, but those are still phenomena that are present in the current times. Also, the increasing of polarized societies, heightened by intolerance. Polarization is not new. Democracy do not mean not confrontation, not crush of different positions, but it means that those conflicts are solved throughout democratic and institutionalized democratic ways. Despite that, polarization in the current times are added by not new, but a very disruptive, anti-democratic value, which is intolerance. Polarization plus intolerance make that in the public discourse, the adversaries are not recognized as oppositors, legitimate oppositors to our own perspectives and point of views, but are considered as enemies, which you have to fight and eventually eliminate. Polarization plus intolerance, as history shows to us, is the narrative basis of the worst totalitarian expressions or exercise in the last century. Also, a new phenomena is the COVID pandemic, which compromised all the, the capabilities of electoral systems to make compatible, the exercise of political rights, in first instance to vote, with the health rights. That's the context in which our democracies are living in the recent times. But in the case of Mexico, we have, at least in the last 2 or even 3 years, facing new challenges, specifically the one of the harassment and attacks to the electoral bodies coming from public power. This is not a Mexican phenomenon. I would like to set this statement in advance, as we will see the attacks or even the harassment to the electoral management bodies is a global phenomenon. It is happening in Latin America. It is happening in the US. It is happening in Britain and many other places. But the point I would like to underline is that Mexico is a sort kind of laboratory in which all this, all the ways in which these harassment and attacks are presenting in different countries are all still together in the Mexican case. Which one, I'd like to underline and start this part of my presentation, reminding what Jose Ortega said, the great Spanish philosopher of the last century, said about, the role of the electoral system in the whole democratic building. It's true, democracy do not reduce itself only in the electoral procedure, but it depends on the electoral procedure to become a reality. And the electoral process, said Ortega said, is the tiny technical detail in which the whole democratic buildings stands up. And that's why if you have harassment against the electoral bodies, an attack to the electoral system, the whole democratic system is in danger. And that is what's happening, I think, in recent times in Mexico, in which is a country in which we are facing not only the challenges I had mentioned, which are global challenges for democracy, but we're facing a particular and a very specific attack to its electoral system coming from the governmental and the power circuits. There are 4 main expressions of this harassment. In first place, the public verbal accusations coming from governmental circuits. In second place, the menaces and the physical aggressions, eventually physical aggressions to personal integrity of high EMB's officials. In third place, the budgetary autonomy, which is compromised by budget cuts and budget stress provoked by the responsibles of a defined public budget, which is the Congress, the lower chamber, and to provide the public funds, which is essentially the treasury, the government. And in fourth place, the attempt of electoral reform in order to increase governmental controls and political capture of electoral institutions on one hand, or undermining political party system on the other hand, and eventually erode political representation in the representation institutions of our democracy. I would like to settle just a couple of examples. I would not, I will not stop so much. I prefer to present some facts and public declarations, statements that are with proofs, and not just to as the chief of electoral management body, just to sustain a discourse over or an impression, a personal impression of this kind of disqualification. I would like to state my expressions on facts. Talking about public and verbal accusations coming from the governmental circuits, in the last year we have seen a lot of examples. For instance, in the middle of electoral campaign, which means in the middle of the organization of the largest and most complex election ever in Mexico last year's, like federal and local elections, in which we faced not only the largest election because of the potential number of because of the number of the electoral list, which means, you know, the potential voters, but also because never in our history we have so many political charges, elected charges in dispute. In the middle of that organization, in the middle of the stress of which means organized election, you know, in a very polarized political situation, in the middle of an ineditus context of violence in which we had to organize elections, and in the middle of a pandemic such as the one of the COVID-19, these were some expressions coming from very important politicians linked to the government, politicians or entrepreneurs linked to the government against INE, against the electoral institution. For instance, Mario Delgado, which is the president of the ruling party, in March of the last year, he said that the INE should be exterminated. That's the word, exterminated. Not reformed, not improved, exterminated. Though these expressions were made public just after INE took some decisions, which obviously did not accomplish, you know, the main political parties' expectations, but we applied the law. Maybe you remember it was a point of inflection during the electoral process when INE decided to cancel the candidacies of a couple of candidates, of the Morena's candidates, the main political party, the ruling party candidates, because of they didn't accomplish the accountability rules, which means established by the law, which means the presentation of income and outcome reports to INE, which is penalized by law with the cancellation of the registration. After that, those decisions, many of these expressions were made public. Or, for instance, you know, the expressions of Ricardo Salinas Pliego, which is one of the largest, of the most important media tycoon, an entrepreneur very linked with the government, which said, essentially, INE must die. Or the public declarations of the leader of the Senate, Morena's quote at the Senate, no, that says that if they win the elections, there will be a future electoral reform, but if they lose, they will immediately reform INE in order to reset, you know, the democratic arrangement. Or The former Morena's representative besides INE, all the political parties has representatives besides the electoral management institution in order to oversight and transparency, all the medical transparency of all political decisions, INE's decisions. Well, by the way, he's the actual president of the lower chamber. He said last year that because of political times have changed, it's time to return the electoral function into governmental institutions, to get back all the electoral activity to the Ministry of Interior. Or the president statement claiming that the highest officers of the Electoral Tribunal and the National Electoral Institute are not Democrats, and we conspire, he says, against democracy. All these examples are statements, public statements coming from high political officers of the ruling party or even the government. But we had another kind of attacks. I'm talking about menaces, direct menaces against highest officers, such as the one of Salgado Macedonio, which is a senator from that was candidate to the to Guerrero's government. He was one of the candidates that didn't present their income and outcome reports, and one of those whose INE canceled their registration as candidates, applying what the law says. By the way, those were decisions that were confirmed by the Electoral Tribunal at the time. Is well known menace that Salgado Macedonio, among other politicians linked to the government, said or menaced us to visit with a crowd, with an angry crowd, our homes. Or the very recent criminal complaint that the speaker of the lower chamber presented against 6 of the 11 members of the INE's General Council in recent times. Those complaints are still open besides the Federal Prosecution Office, and those complaints were presented because the speaker was not satisfied with some decisions taken by the General Council in order to postpone some activities of the current recall, which is a referendum appointed to address it, to revocate the presidency mandate until the budget problem that we are facing off is solved. Well, that decision can and was already compelled besides the Electoral Tribunal or the Supreme Court. But this is the first time in 30 years since electoral authorities became autonomous in 1990 with the creation of former IFE, Federal Electoral Institute, which became 8 years ago the current INE. Is the first time that a referendum with INE's decision is processed throughout criminal complaints. I would like to say, if you allow me to get back to this slide, I will. Yes, that right now INE is facing also an ineditous budgetary situation. because the lower chamber, the Chamber of Deputies, which has the constitutional authority to settle, to establish the budget, the federal budget, decided to cut off the 26% of what INE requested to accomplish these years 2022 activities, including this ineditus exercise of this recall referendum, which is right now in course. Without any explanation, the Chamber of Deputies cut off our budget and allocate INE in the ineditus situation to have no enough money to accomplish their constitutional attributions powers. Right now, we have make an extraordinary cut exercise in order to reduce, canceling programs, postponing some other programs, settling economy goals to these years in order to founding this recall referendum. But right now we are far away from the money we need to organize this exercise, this democratic exercise, which is by the way settled by law as an exercise that has to accomplish, and I agree with that, all the guarantees and conditions that we have to accomplish in a federal election. The referendum recall is essentially an election such as the one which in 2018 get the President López Obrador elected. Well, right now we have no money in order to enough to accomplish what law mandates us, and it's an inevitable dispute that the Supreme Court of Justice has to solve. But this is a new scenario in which the cutoffs determined by the lower chamber get levels never ever seen before. And right now there is by the way, a very interesting but very delicate constitutional discussion to set if the power of the lower chamber to determine the budget, the federal budget, is an uncontrolled and an unlimited power, or it has to satisfy, the necessities of the state powers branches and electoral and autonomous institutions, agencies, or there are no limits in that powers. Finally, I'd like to settle that right now there is no bill already presented, initiative presented by the government in order to reform the electoral system, but there is already a public announcement made by the president that one of the three main reforms still pending in the next 2 years is an electoral reform. An electoral reform, he has said, which has essentially three main axes. First, to cut off at the half, the public financiation to the political parties, which will eventually erode, the capabilities and the health of the political parties system. No one is against to reduce that amount. I think in Mexico, political parties receive a lot. Too much public funding, But one thing is to rethink those amounts, and another thing is to cut it off at half, which eventually allocate some political parties in conditions to not inequality conditions to face off the future electoral compromises. And the second main act of that announced reform already announced is to eliminate, the representatives, the members of the Senate and the lower chamber, to eliminate or reduce, the representatives elected by proportional system, which is one of the main democratic conquests in our in order to build a most representative political system, democratic system. And the third main act is the one to, under the principle of austerity, to reform the electoral management bodies, the body, INE, essentially, but with the intention also to eliminate, they say, the political tendency which is currently aimed at the INE's decision, and to establish an authentic, autonomous and independent institution. That's what they say. It's a paradox that these attempts of electoral reform are coming from those who were the largest beneficiary of impartial and independent INE's activity in the last 8 years. You must know that in this last period, in the last 7 years, we had the largest period, or the period, this was the period of the largest alternates throughout elections in the political power, both at the federal and local level. And the main beneficiary of that alternance is precisely Morena, the ruling party, but is also the largest critic of the electoral system, and the main impulsor of an electoral reform, which, as I already mentioned, is a reform intended to refound the electoral system. I would like to end just saying a couple of things. Let me skip some slides. This kind of harassment is not only a Mexican phenomenon. This is happening in many countries in different ways. For instance, in Brazil, we are facing right now some of the strongest disqualifications coming from President Bolsonaro against the electoral authorities. In Peru, we have seen in the last year's electoral process not only menaces but also physical aggressions against highest electoral officers. In Bolivia, it's right now incurs a criminal complaint against the former members of the electoral authority. In El Salvador, President Bukele has just appointed as the administrator of the systems office of the electoral authority, the people who was the responsible of his social media strategy. In the Dominican Republic, the electoral bodies are facing the largest cutoffs in their history, which are compromising their capabilities to face off the future elections. And well, in Great Britain, even President and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has presented a bill which is right now in process in the Parliament, in discussion in the Parliament, in order to take control and increase governmental controls over the electoral authority, the electoral commission. Well, in the United States, we just celebrate the first anniversary of the riot against the Capitol, and so on. You know best than me. Better than me that in several states in the United States are in course some reforms not necessarily aimed to improve and strengthen the electoral system, but in order to eventually lock down the democratic conquest that has been achieved in several states. As you see, the world map of the menaces against electoral institutions is not is a terrific one. But the problem, as I said, is that despite in many countries electoral management bodies are facing this kind of attacks, all the fourth kind of attacks or harassments issues are present in Mexico. Not only one, not only two, but the fourth of them. Which represents a sort kind of a very delicate situation, because Mexico is eventually in order to become a laboratory of the lockdown of eventually lockdown of democracy, despite all the improvements and the conquest we have achieved in the last 30 years. My last comment, and despite that, which is another paradox, despite those attacks, the public health, INE's public health, is pretty well. Right now, we are currently having the largest amount of credibility and public trust among Mexican citizenship. Never in the 31 years of history of our electoral system in democratic key, IFE or INE has achieved almost around 70% of public credibility. As you can see in these graphics, which are polls rising in the last year, INE's credibilities, depending the poll, reaches almost 70% of public credibility. Which make INES, as I previously mentioned, the civic institution, public institution with the largest credibility and trust. That's a paradox. That's our strength to face off these challenges. But eventually, the risks that Mexican democratic electoral system is facing are a lot, are concerning us, and obviously may represent eventually, we hope not, we trust in citizenship, but eventually may represent a lockdown in our democratic commitment and in our democratic history. I'm sorry, Andrew, if I took too much time, but for me, it's an incredible opportunity to share with you our concerns, our strengths, also our strengths, but the most important, the possibility to discuss with you, these challenges, which are Mexican, obviously, but unfortunately are challenges that we are facing all the democratic countries right now in nowadays. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cordova. It was an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time and providing so much detail, as you said, so many facts. It's now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Alan Lowenthal, who represents California's 47th Congressional District. Prior to joining Congress, Congressman Lowenthal served a 2-decade tenure as first a Long Beach, California City Council member, and then as a California state legislator. In Washington, D.C., the congressman has continued his dedication to bipartisan solutions. Throughout his time in public service, Congressman Lowenthal has been an advocate for democratic institutions and a defender of human rights across the United States and the hemisphere at large. Congressman Lowenthal was raised in Queens, New York. He received a bachelor's degree from Hobart and William Smith Colleges and his PhD from Ohio State University. Congressman, welcome and thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to kind of ramble for a little bit. I have some notes, but I think I'm going to kind of abbreviate them. I want to thank you for inviting me. I think this is very timely to talk about threats to our electoral institutions, and obviously, therefore, threats to democracy. And as President Cordova has said, this is not a phenomenon that we're just seeing in Mexico or in the United States, but it's a worldwide phenomenon right now that democracy is under attack. I want to thank President Cordova for this fascinating presentation on the current situation in Mexico, for presenting what is an attack and how the electoral process and how INE is trying to protect and safeguard the electoral process. It's being undermined. And I thought I would share my history, a little bit of history, on trying to protect one part of our electoral process, which I have found, and maybe I'll share some of the issues, also very difficult. I want to start by saying this is a very interesting and an important time for us to come together to discuss the key issue of electoral reform. And as has become very obvious in the last couple of years, the United States does not have all the answers. We are embroiled in this discussion and talks and many of us are very concerned about protecting democracy here in the United States as much as protecting and as others are in fighting to protect democracy worldwide. And I have to admit, this is a very discouraging time. As someone who lived through and was there for the January 6th, 2021 attack on our Constitution, it was an attack on the Capitol of the United States. It was a very frightening experience. Not only the fact of the physical attack, but that the institution of democracy itself was threatened. The peaceful transfer of power, which had been a hallmark of the American democracy, was being threatened, and so that was critically important. And also, right now, we are seeing as our Congress is in kind of gridlock, that much of the problem is not an individual problem, but we have something called the filibuster here in the United States, which keeps us from really engaging in a democratic process. Many of my colleagues and I are very concerned about a filibuster where the majority of the Congress is not able to pass legislation, and we see that as a tremendous threat to democracy. And it's going to take a lot of action. And it's been clear to those of us who honor and who value honest and open democracy, who value the rule of law and independent free institutions, that we're going to have to all work together across nations. The actual exact challenges may be different that I'm going to explain than what's going on in Mexico. But democracy and human rights are not automatic, and we all need to come together as the attacks upon human rights and democracy are challenged everywhere. As was pointed out by President Cordova, independent institutions can be politicized. For example, in the United States, in most states of the country, or at least in many, if not most, our electoral maps, which determine which party is in power, what will happen, are frequently manipulated by politicians today who seek to choose their own voters or to protect themselves from accountability. So the basis of our electoral system is undermined, where powerful people are able to manipulate the political process for their own gains. And it's going to take real work by people and civil society to protect and to maintain this, especially in the United States, this critical institutions. As a favorite quote by Ben Franklin, often invoked by the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi, we have a republic if we can keep it. And that's really what we're talking about, if we can keep it. And it is more than ever under threat. And I'd like to share just a few minutes my experiences in California, where I learned about how difficult it is to bring about social and political change, which reflects the will of the people and not the will of those who are in power. As was pointed out before I came to Congress, I served in the California legislature. I was elected to the legislature in 1998. And then shortly after that, in 2001, we went through the process of going through redistricting, where electoral maps are redrawn. I found that this process in 2001 was very upsetting, because regardless of the parameters that we put on redistricting, what I found was that late at night, rather than following the Voting Rights Act, rather than following fair principles, elected officials held private meetings behind closed doors and literally selected their own voters. Those officials prioritized political expediency and incumbency protection. That's really what we were doing, over any criteria that considered natural boundaries, compactness, the interest of communities of interest. And this was very, very upsetting to me as I watched this unfold and saw the power of it, that both parties were part of this. The party, and I'll explain that in a minute. Rather than letting the people draw the lines, or reflecting that elections would be based upon, that people would have a chance to elect representatives who reflected communities of interest, elections became representative of the self-interest of those that were there. I joined with others to see if we could bring about change, which was a very interesting phenomenon. I led a campaign to create an independent redistricting commissions, different than the electoral commission that we've heard in Mexico, but one that was similar there, to try to protect the electoral process, to be independent of the powerful political interests, and would come to draw lines and set up elections that were based upon the interests of communities over special interests. We set up rules, guarantees for this to ensure fairness, but really what we were talking about was empowering citizens. But I have to say that, just as we're hearing throughout the world, the existence of an independent commission really threatened the power structure. It threatened the power structure in California, the assembly, which was not going to change and give up the power. The party that was in power, which happened to be the party I was a member of, the Democratic Party, but throughout the country, we're seeing whichever party is in power of their legislation does not want to give up power. And it took our governor, when I could not get this bill out of the legislature, to create an independent commission, the Governor Schwarzenegger, to put on the ballot and let the people decide of California. The governor took the lead on this when the legislature could not self-regulate itself. the governor took the lead in making sure that the people of California would make this. And so, and what we're hearing is attacks on these kinds of institutions that truly reflect the democratic process and protect our electoral process throughout the world, whether it's through social media and others. These institutions that are there to protect the electoral process sometimes are called the deep state or other terms, and that is really just designed to block the will of the people. This is all very dangerous, and democracy without strong rules of law and institutional safeguards is all too vulnerable to collapse or to abuse. And it's critical for us to come together to talk about the protection of institutions which try to protect democracy, protect grassroots values, freedom, that we come together. So we're now trying, what's interesting is, what I was working on in California is now popular gerrymandering reform throughout the United States. And there are now attempts to create and have been successful in a small number of states, a few states, true independent commissions. And again, as I point out, whether they're Republican states or Democratic states, usually the commissions, if they're truly independent, are opposed by the party that's in power. In Congress, we tried to put an independent commission in our For the People Act, but as I pointed out, the set earlier, another threat to democracy is the filibuster. We cannot even get the United States Senate to hear about these kinds of electoral reforms that we need, because the Senate is not a truly democratic institution as long as it has one of the remnants of the Jim Crow era, and that is the filibuster to keep a true democratic process from occurring. So we have to tell the truth. We've seen that in telling the truth is under tremendous threat in the United States. We have to be able to hold powerful people accountable, and we have to protect voters and safeguards. And we're going to have to do that by all working together. We're going to have to, as President Cordova pointed out, we're going to have to combat misinformation, overcome constraints like budgets, as he has pointed out, or the filibuster. We must be prepared for setbacks and frustrations. However, we all have platforms and voices which make this case to democratic electorates across borders. So this is our challenge for all of us to be able to speak out now to protect democracy. President Biden has been clear that democracy is a global value. It's going to take a global coordination to support and cultivate something to defend it. He's exactly right. I've spent my time in Congress advancing the cause of global human rights, and we should not be bogged down by narrow discussions of migration in those areas, or narrow self-interest. We must cultivate a strong partnership to support our shared values and work together more than ever before. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, President Cordova, for your champion of the true electoral process, independent electoral process, and the threats to that in Mexico. I appreciate being here, and again, I thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Really appreciate the comments. Talking about specific examples you've experienced is always impactful. I'd like to invite our two panelists to share some thoughts, and then we'll have a brief question and answer session. If you'd like to pose a question to any of the speakers or panelists, please either tag us on Twitter at Mexico Institute or email them to mexico@wilsoncenter.org. I'll introduce the two panelists consecutively. We'll start with Tony Garastas, who He is Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Republican Institute. Tony has more than 20 years of international experience leading and managing diverse programs and teams in the realms of business, government, and academia. Prior to assuming his current position, Tony served as Director of the Center for Global Impact at IRI, contributing to democratic development programming, leading global initiatives, and cutting-edge approaches to emerging challenges and trends. From 2011 to 2018, he oversaw the Institute's Central America, Haiti, and Mexico programming, where he focused on anti-corruption, security, rule of law, open government, elections, and local governance. Dr. Grastazu has published extensively, including his dissertation, Interest Groups and the Politics of Trade After the Cold War, the case of the US, Jordan, Singapore, and Chile free trade agreements. He holds a bachelor's degree in history and political science from the University of Florida, as well as a master's and PhD in international studies from the University of Miami. And then we'll turn directly to Deborah Ulmer, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the National Democratic Institute. Deborah brings more than 20 years of experience managing a range of democracy assistance and human rights programs. Most recently, she served as Freedom House's Director for Latin America and the Caribbean programs, and as Chief of Party for USAID Office of Transition Initiatives program in Nicaragua. She earned a BA in Political Science and Modern Languages from Seton Hall University, took graduate courses in Latin American Studies at American University School of International Service, and she's currently pursuing an executive master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution at American School of International Service. So with that, Tony, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cordova and Congressman Lowenthal for your comments and presentations. I'll be brief. I want to touch upon, what is happening in Mexico, in particular via more of a governance, kind of a citizen-centered perspective. Now, much of the efforts Mexico undertook during its transition to democracy involved autonomous oversight institutions, such as the INE, really to level the playing field of political competition. The institutional conflicts between the Mexican government and autonomous oversight institutions, whether electoral, regulatory, or academic, hampers one of the pillars of democratic consolidation in Mexico. As we've discussed, INE is recognized regionally and globally as a leading electoral institution with technical fortitude and really a progressive approach to the changing times. It's kept its technical capacity not only confined to Mexico. Since 1993, it's participated in 93 international technical assistance missions in 38 countries, the last of which was in Ecuador in October of 2021, to help with the use of technology for the electoral process. Some of the assistance missions that stand out actually are Timor-Leste referendum prior to its independence, Peru after the resignation of Alberto Fujimori, and Iraq, just to name a few. But the technical assistance INE has provided really goes beyond these missions. It's also received and receives numerous delegations. For example, IRI, the organization that I represent, has brought delegations of legislative leaders, civil society, and electoral magistrates from across the region to take part in best practice exchanges and learn from the INE's experience and technical expertise. Most recently, in a roundtable organized by IRI, INE shared with regional counterparts their strategies and lessons learned on how to overcome challenges confronting disinformation, as we know a prevalent global trend. The recent elections in June of last year in Mexico really attest to the strength and credibility of INE, an institution that manages the largest electorate in Spanish-speaking Latin America, the third largest in the Americas after the US and Brazil, composed of almost 94 million voters. In the electoral process last year, 1.4 million citizens were trained to take charge of over 160,000 polling stations. Now, I live in Mexico, serving as IRI's country director, and could clearly see how elections are a testament of coexistence between neighbors. Polling station officials are citizens, right, selected by public lottery, adhering to this civic task freely. Citizens facilitate their homes, shops, offices, so that voting booths can be installed, allowing voters to find a polling place close to their homes. Another aspect of citizen participation is through observation. Last year, over 19,000 Mexican citizens were accredited as observers, of which almost 85% did so independently and almost 15% through some civil society organization. Now, citizen participation in the organization of electoral processes overseen by INE has become effective and I dare say cost-effective and practical vehicle for Mexicans to build and strengthen their democracy. Now, let's not forget the massive election last year was also conducted within the context of COVID. Again, here is where participation and volunteerism think saved the day. The INE COVID-19 strategic group was created, made up of specialists who individually or as a group and on an honorary basis offer health-related advice, as well as those considered necessary to inform decision-making with scientifically based evidence. As a result, after the elections of last year, there was no immediate surge in COVID infections, particularly attributable, I think, to INE's efforts. Now, the big question is how and why we are sitting here today watching such a strong institution, a vanguard institution, technically speaking, a progressive institution that has been changing with the times, and really a resilient institution which is vital for the strength of Mexico's democracy, going through so much distress. In Mexico, from opposition political parties to civil society, from people that have been poll booth officials, volunteer observers, and those that have lent their homes as polling booths, right? We hear concern. A credible, serious, and autonomous institution, now INE is between a rock and a hard place. As we've discussed, INE may have to implement the upcoming April 10th revocation with the resources it has available. As we've heard from Dr. Cordova, their budget was also cut in 2021 and successive years before that. If additional resources are not allocated by the Mexican government, INE may be severely handicapped, right? Diminishing the number of polling places, providing less training and civic education. For example, putting the electoral process in jeopardy without adequate funding, the INE really can't fulfill its mandate 100%. Yet the narrative against the INE will continue as not having done enough. We need to remember that the discourse against the INE is not new. It's been part of the narrative for years and really escalated with some of the electoral losses by opposition forces in the 2006 and 2012 elections. These brutal attacks against the INE really continue to make it a scapegoat, and it's a very serious issue that I'm very glad that Andrew and the Mexico Institute put this roundtable together, because it's an issue that needs to be followed closely, as Dr. Cordova rightly stated, not only in Mexico, but across the region and across the globe as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go over to Deborah.
Thank you. I want to thank the Wilson Center for inviting me, and it's an honor to join Dr. Cordova, Congressman Lowenthal, my colleagues from the Wilson Center and IRI in this important conversation about challenges facing not only Mexico's National Electoral Institute, but electoral management bodies worldwide. I will also try to be brief to allow for discussion. As my IRI colleague mentioned, the INE's model is at the vanguard of independent electoral institutions. The INE serves as an important reference around the world for those countries seeking to build citizen confidence in its electoral processes and institutions. INE model strikes a balance with nonpartisan members, ensuring independence, impartiality, and professionalization of the institution, and non-voting party representatives giving voice to political actors to ensure that their interests are taken into consideration in INE's deliberations. INE has been an important partner in providing recommendations to establish an independent, nonpartisan electoral management bodies and ensuring access to accurate information while combating mis or disinformation. NDI has collaborated with INE to provide technical assistance to other electoral management bodies in the region, including Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Guatemala. My organization, the National Democratic Institute, is a non-governmental organization that supports democratic institutions overseas and is working with around 28,000 national partners in more than 70 countries on 5 continents. In the lead up to last year's state and local elections in Mexico, NDI supported civil society to monitor the use of government funds for electoral purposes, cases of electoral violence, and the number of interactions on social media related to verified election news to combat disinformation. At the global level, NDI promotes electoral integrity by building national capacities to monitor their own elections and supporting international election observation, which complements national actors' efforts. We do so by reinforcing three principles: inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability, to ensure that elections can resolve the competition for office peacefully, as well as accurately reflect the will of the people. There has been a gradual transition from electoral management bodies conformed by party representatives to institutions led by nonpartisan experts. This transition has fostered greater independence, or what International IDEA calls fearless independence, by not bending to partisan influences on their decisions, as well as impartiality, with electoral management bodies treating all election participants equally, fairly, and even-handedly. In the long run, a more independent electoral management body also fosters professionalization of the institution, as electoral staff are less likely to leave or be replaced with each change of government. Unfortunately, as Dr. Cordova mentioned, there's a disturbing trend around the world which attempts to discredit independent electoral institutions that could act as a counterbalance to incumbents' political ambitions. The attempt to discredit electoral institutions has many manifestations, including reducing or debating the electoral management body's budget at a time of increased responsibilities, such as in the lead up to elections. In the Philippines, we recently saw the government reduce the budget requested by the Commission on Elections by 37%. Independent analysts warned that additional funds would be needed to COVID-proof the elections. In Honduras, Congress required the National Electoral Council to arrange for the rapid transmission of election results, but delayed the allocation of necessary funding to do so. In many instances, this resulted in equipment being distributed to polling centers on the day of the elections. Public questioning of the electoral authority or its voting processes is another manifestation. Last year, as Dr. Cordova mentioned, President Bolsonaro began to sow doubt in the integrity of Brazil's electronic voting system. Brazil has been running fully automated elections since 2000 and has used the current system since 2008. Finally, the surge of disinformation, often from several sources, further compounds the problems. For example, in India, a post went viral that incorrectly and perhaps maliciously had a former chief election commissioner stating that a particular party won seats by hacking electronic voting machines. NDI has worked with civil society and electoral authorities in Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico to help identify, track, and counter this disinformation. The integrity of elections depends on diverse processes, and while no election or election institution is perfect, positive developments across these processes move a country toward a peaceful, credible elections and a stable democratic governance. It is important that the INE continues to ensure impartial and effective administrations of all the complex, relatively costly or cost-effective nowadays, and time-sensitive elements of the electoral management for elections to continue to be peaceful and credible in Mexico. We look forward to this fruitful discussion with Dr. Cordova and Congressman Lowenthal, and thank you, Andrew, for inviting us.
Thank you, Tony and Deborah. Really appreciate you being here and your comments. As I mentioned, we do have a little bit of time for questions, which can be sent to us either on Twitter @Mexico Institute or via email mexico@wilsoncenter.org. While I'm waiting to see if we have questions from our viewers, let me pose one. Go back to you, Dr. Cordova. Maybe you could talk a little bit, you have mentioned very clearly the challenges of managing the revocation del mandato, the referendum in April. If the budget situation isn't addressed, what impact could that conceivably have on the June elections, which you also are responsible for organizing, or maybe what would be your plan for successfully implementing both if you need to do so with your current resources?
Yes, Sandra, I think this is a main question. because it's not only an issue that concerns, the revocación del mandato procedure, not the recall referendum, but I think it's a public discussion that should be solved. Otherwise, it could become, or have an effect demonstration. What I intend to say is that, okay, I can understand this is part of a certain discussion, a specific discussion, and eventually confrontation with the Chamber of Deputies and the government because of the budget issue. But what concerns us is not, the problem of the revocation of mandate, but the fact that this can become a practice in the future that could compromise, elections and the democratic integrity, electoral integrity. This revocatory procedure is something very curious. Last November, I went to the book fair of Guadalajara, and I meet there. We share a roundtable with the President Rodríguez Zapatero, with former Spanish First Minister, and he asked me with a lot of strangeness. It's true that the revocatory is not claimed by the opposition, but is claimed by the government. Yes, and that's not strange. I told him, well, Mexico is a very strange country in many ways. But what I intend to say is that it's very delicate at the moment. But everybody knows right now what will happen the April the 10th when the revocatory election journey took place. The President López Obrador has an enormous amount of popularity, almost 65%. Everybody, despite what happens in an election that there is an uncertainty about the results, everybody has a certainty about what will happen with this revocatory procedure, this recall procedure. The problem is not that. The problem is that, the president, if we take into account what will happen in future elections. Fortunately, he has done everything it's on its hands to assure the budget necessary to run the 6 governors' election that we will held in next June the 5th. The problem is, what will happen with INE's budget in face of 2024 general elections? Those will be the largest election ever in Mexican history, and very probably there will be very competitive. There will be a huge competition. If you have not certainty about the results, as it usually happens in an election, well, the budget should not be a problem for an electoral body. I'm not saying that money should flow and will be expended without any control at all. INE, you must take in account, is not only an institution, electoral institution that has to hold a lot of powers that not many institutions, as Deborah and Tony just said, that not many institutions in the world has to run off. For instance, we held and maintain permanently the electoral list, which provides, the electoral ID, which has become the main ID for Mexican citizens. INE has to oversight the political financiation to the political parties and during campaigns. INE has to monitoring, is the only EMB all around the world that has to monitoring all the broadcasting, radio and TV, in order to assure that prohibitions and conditions of the the communication Mexican communication system is already political system is already worked precisely, are respected, and so on. And the INE has to run elections. INE has to provide, INE is the most oversight authority, civil authority in Mexico. It has a political oversight from political parties. It has an internal oversight. It has a federal oversight, and we every year we had, a private oversight of all our budget. The fact is, no one is claiming for the flow of money without any control, but the money should not become a problem for running elections. Because as Deborah said about electoral integrity, it's not only a matter of electoral integrity, it is undoubtedly, but it's also a matter of democratic sustainability. And that's what is in game in the future. That's why it's very important that the Supreme Court solves, this the complaints have been presented throughout it, and settle, a precedent for the future. It's very, very important what is happening right now, not because of the revocatory exercise, but because of the future of elections in Mexico.
Thank you, Dr. Cordova. Great additional insights and context for all of us. We're getting close to the time we have to wrap up. I'll just open the floor at it. Tony and Deborah, if you want to add anything, or maybe I'll provoke a little bit by one of the things that everybody talked about, including Congressman Lowenthal, was disinformation and that issue of fake news. I just wonder maybe briefly you could talk about what your institutions are doing to try to combat it. And then I think we'll probably have to end there, but let me start maybe with you, Deborah.
Sure, thank you. That is an emerging threat worldwide, combating disinformation, because it comes from various sources. And sometimes it comes from the political parties or ruling parties themselves, but also from other maligned actors. What NDI is currently doing, and with the assistance of INE and others, is to really monitor different types of online threats. For instance, INE has been on the vanguard of monitoring online threats to women political candidates. And that's an area that Dr. Cordova had mentioned earlier that, unfortunately, while Mexico has been on the forefront of gender parity in Congress and now parity at all levels, we have seen an uptick in violence against women candidates and women in media. And so, we thank Dr. Cordova's leadership on this, because partnerships like this and in Colombia and elsewhere with other electoral management bodies of all the other things that they're monitoring, they're also having to monitor this, because gender parity is not just about political parties putting and nominating women on ballots, but it's also having to then combat violence and threats, online threats from their own party actors sometimes. And having electoral management bodies serve as leadership that's to not allow this type of online threats is important. We have seen other types of disinformation, but I'll let my colleague Tony speak to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Go ahead, Tony, please.
Great, thank you, Deborah. Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit more on that. And, as Deborah was mentioning, we do a lot of similar collaborations across the region, across the globe. One of the things that we've been working through lately is really working with the different communications departments at some of the electoral tribunals across the region, and helping them get the correct information out there, really to build citizen confidence into the institutions, and trying to decipher, what is the right narrative, what is the false discourse, and also working, particularly with the political parties, right? Working with them to help them disseminate the information in a way that citizens can understand, and really try to lower that political discourse, that boiling point that typically happens, particularly in the first round of elections, right? When the heat is really up. But the main thing here is trying to work with leaders to try and get the correct information in the best way possible so that citizens can have and feel confident in the information that they're receiving is the correct one, and really to try and decipher, some of the different mechanisms that are available out there. But the important thing is to really try to build some of these institutions, the trust that citizens have. That's probably the most critical way to go about fighting, right, this disinformation. And I think it's important for INE, right, as we've heard, unfortunately last week, some of the disinformation from several political actors, particularly with the issue of the mascots, right, of the pets. That's really silly, right? But it's important that INE gets that message out there in a very concrete and forceful way that convinces citizens that, hey, no, this is what we're doing. And the fact that the INE is one of the most reputable institutions out there should really, really help.
Thank you, Dr. Cordova. If you want to add just anything else to wrap up.
Just two telegraphical thoughts, if you allow me, Andrew. One, inspired on what Tony has just said. By the way, Deborah, we still go on and the building of a more equal and in terms of gender society. But the first thought is, Tony, I think one of the main challenges of the electoral management bodies, not only, but for them in the current times, is to learn to become, a communicational office. I mean, for us today, nowadays, is as much as important, the technical and operational offices to run elections, as well as the communication offices. In times of post-truth, we have to establish, communication strategies in order to set clear, effective, and timeless and information. I mean, we have to fight misinformation with information, and we have to improve our capabilities, to provide precise information and to try to set a difficult ground so the misinformation strategies go forward. And the last thought, just in quoting Representative Lowenthal at his intervention, I mean, he said the independent electoral institution threatened power. Yes, it's inevitable. We are part of the, of the modern division of powers. I mean, the times in which there are three great branches, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch are gone. Right now, the control of power in a democracy, in a constitutional democracy, is much more complex than that. And electoral authorities, as well as the rest of independent agencies, public agencies, is fundamental in order to achieve, the logic of the checks and balances. That's why inevitably an independent and autonomous electoral body or an electoral commission is this wise, the power, particularly in times in which you are seeing very dangerous concentration of powers in the executive hands all around the world. Andrew, thank you so much once again. This is a common fight, and for us it's very important to have as strategic partners not just the Wilson Center but also the NDI and the IRI. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this morning with you.
Thank you, Presidente Consejero Córdova. Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal, Deborah Ulmer, and Tony Garastasu for being with us today. Your insights, your candor have helped give all of us a far better appreciation of the challenges facing INE and the importance of promoting and defending the independence of democratic institutions around the world. I want to just quickly highlight a publication that we just published on our website. regarding the challenges and risks facing Mexican democracy. The paper is a rapporteur's report of a day-long conversation we held at the Wilson Center last November with a number of Mexican senators from all major parties and academics from Mexico and the United States. The report's available now in Spanish and will shortly also be posted in English. We hope that that report contributes some ideas and insights for consideration by Mexican citizens as they work to perfect their democracy, just as we do here in the States. Finally, I want to thank all of you who joined us virtually this morning, or those of you who will watch this later on our website. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you have a great afternoon.